your life until you're dead. That is a love worth waiting for. Because that is a love worth dying for. So the first young man wanted to take advantage of this young woman and use her as an object for pleasure and gratification. Let me tell you about a second guy. A few years back, I was in Singapore, which I've been there several times. Amazing country, by the way. And I was in adoration. Now, in their adoration chapels in Asia, in a lot of places, they don't have benches or kneelers. Big open room, Blessed Sacrament, they have these like huge pillows, like throw pillows. So I was in the chapel, praying in the office, the morning office. I had my back up against the wall on a cushion. This young guy, probably he's 24 years old, 23, 24, walks in, and what I noticed was his suit. Not Men's Warehouse that I wear. This guy's suit was like 100% silk. I'm looking at that suit going, dang, that must have cost at least $3,000. He takes his jacket, he takes his shoes off, takes his jacket off, folds it up, lays on top of his shoes, walks over for the Blessed Sacrament and lays down prostrate, face to the ground before Jesus. And I'm like praying in my office, checking in. You don't see that every day. He laid there for probably 15, 20 minutes. Then he got up, didn't say a word, got up, dusted himself off, went back, put his jacket on, put his shoes on. I said, I gotta go talk to this guy. So I ran after him. I said, excuse me, I don't mean to disturb you, but I'm visiting here from the States. I'm doing a mission in the parish. I noticed that, obviously I can tell by your suit, you do something really important, but you made time for Jesus. He said, oh yeah, I'm an investment banker. I work probably 60 to 70 hours a week. I don't have time to always come into the chapel and spend an hour in adoration, but I catch 15, 20, half an hour here or there. I said, that's awesome. I said, your girlfriend must really think that you're like an amazing guy. And he laughed in my face. He goes, I don't have a girlfriend. And he goes, I'm praying for my future wife. And I said, this dude gets it. He totally gets it. He's there praying for that God will put the person in his life to help him get to heaven. You see the two different guys there? One using her as an object, and one praying that God place someone in his life so they can spend eternity together in heaven. That's awesome. Now, because that wasn't God's plan from the beginning. How did God plan that we're supposed to view and see each other? In Genesis 1:27, it says that we are made in God's image and likeness. You've all heard that before. We're made in the image and likeness of God. But have we stopped to think about what those words actually mean? The word image is a masculine noun in Hebrew, tselem. And it literally means a shadow that is the outline or representation of the original. So if I'm standing in the light, I'm casting a shadow. Is the shadow me? This ain't mass, it's okay, you can. Is the shadow me? No, it's the outline, it's the image, it's the representation of me. Yet if I move, the shadow does whatever I do. What does that mean spiritually? Are we God? Oh, come on, that should be a very emphatic no. In fact, if it's not no, we got issues. Of course we're not God. But 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 4 says we are partakers in the divine nature. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 19, St. Paul says our bodies are temples of the that we have within us from God. Genesis chapter 2 verse 8 says, a beautiful phrase in Hebrew, Nishmat Ruach Kaim. God took the breath and breathed into our nostrils the breath of life. So we're not God, but we have God's life. If you want, God's shadow, God's outline imprinted onto our soul. So what does that mean spiritually? That from the beginning was God's plan that we reflect God's life in us. So before the fall, the thinking was, when we think, we're reflecting the mind of God. When we speak, we're reflecting the thoughts of God. And when we love, we're reflecting the love of God. Okay? That was God's plan from the beginning. What about likeness? Demuth in Hebrew, which is a feminine noun, which means similar. What does that mean spiritually? Let's say someone wanted to create a Deacon Howard statue. Don't do that, okay? But you have the statue, the bust of me. You put that on one side. You take my son Benjamin, and you put Ben on the other side of me. Now you would say they're both in my likeness because they both look like me. In fact, the statue looks more like me than my son. But what does the statue have? I mean, what does my son have that the statue does not have? Soul. Yeah, soul, right? Life. Ousia in Greek. You know, my stuff is and God's stuff is in my son. So even though the statue looks more like me, my son is much more in my likeness. That's the understanding of how we're supposed to see each other, how we're supposed to look at each other. That's God's plan. In fact, if you keep reading to the next verse, in Genesis 1, so he creates male and female. What's the first thing God does? And God blessed them. Verse 28. And God blessed them. So he creates them in his image and likeness. And even before he speaks to them, the first thing God does is what? He blesses them. What is God doing there in blessing them? What is a blessing between a man and a woman called? Yeah, marriage. They get married. Or in other words, God establishes a covenant between the two. That's the very first thing God does. He establishes a covenant between the two of them. Why is that important? Because we live in a culture today that says that relationships are just contracts between people. It's just a contractual relationship. Just like you go to a store and you buy a cell phone and you get a contract. That's what, in fact, what language do we use for contract? Friends with benefits. Hit it and quit it. Bang that chick. And the garbage language that so many young people use to describe relationships, like the first example I gave, where they treat each other as objects for pleasure and gratification. That is not God's plan for us. Whenever God wants to establish a relationship, he doesn't establish no contract. He establishes a covenant. A contract is just an exchange of goods. This is yours and this is mine. A covenant is an exchange of persons. I am yours and you are mine. It's making a complete and total gift of yourself to someone. And that someone makes a complete and total gift of themselves back to you in love that is free and faithful and total and fruitful. It's a love that gives everything. It's a love that holds nothing back because Jesus held nothing back of his love for us on the cross. He gave everything. And that's exactly what God expects from us. And that's what marriage is. That's what the priesthood is for Father. Because who's his bride? The church. The church. How does he give, now, he don't have sex, but how does he give life to the church, to his bride? Eucharist. The Eucharist. What does Jesus say? Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. No priesthood, no Eucharist. No Eucharist, no life. Oh yeah, so he gives, you better believe it. What's the other way he gives life? Sacrament of reconciliation. When you walk in that confessional, you're dead. You are dead when you walk out, you're alive. So that's are the ways that you better believe the priests give life. In fact, because they know, I hate to disappoint you, there ain't no sex in heaven. So if you were looking forward to that, I just disappointed you. It ain't happening. The priest relationship where he represents Christ, and Christ is giving himself to his bride, the church, forever in heaven. That's what the relationship is pointing toward, is directed toward. Life with God forever in heaven. Now, this is also awesome here because they get married. Very interesting. What I love about the scriptures here is how much they value the power of femininity and womanhood. Like, for example, talk about getting married here. Now, when I got married, I walked out and I stood at the front of the altar with my best man. Everybody looked at me and said, nice tux. But you know what happened next? Flower girl came in, ring bearer came in, the mothers came in, and then the bridal party came in, and everybody's all lined up. Best man made a vow. All of a sudden, the doors close, and there's silence in the church. Like in the book of Revelation, when they broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven. And all of a sudden, the door flies open, and the music starts. Everybody stands up. Everybody's looking back there. Oh, my God, look at that dress. Oh, she's so beautiful. Oh, my God. And everybody is looking at her. You're standing here as a guy going, this is really happening. This is really happening. This is really happening. Tell me I'm wrong. The whole wedding, everybody's looking at her. It's all about the woman. It's all about the woman. It's awesome. Now, interesting. What are God's very first words to us? And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The word, now Jesus uses the Aramaic form of this word, Ephrata. Right? Remember, he was opening the ears of the deaf guy. The guy was mute, and he was deaf and couldn't talk. And he said, remember, he stuck his fingers in his ears. Ephrata, he said in Aramaic, which means be open. The equivalent word here in Hebrew is para. So be open literally means, para literally means to be open. Be fruitful means to be open. So what's God's first words? Be open to life. God's first words, first commandment, if you will, to us, be open to life. Now, the problem is, why? Why should you, given what I just said, the foundation of everything I'm going to talk about that follows now is rooted in covenant relationship with God. That's why Jesus says, this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal contract. New and eternal covenant. Jesus chose his words very carefully. In fact, the priests don't say those words, there's no Eucharist. That's how powerful the words are. And Jesus was very clear, he came to establish a covenant. So everything moving forward from now is going to be rooted in covenant relationship. The question is, why wait? I mean, probably a bunch of your friends are having sex, they're looking at porn, they're doing all this stuff, and you're just like, others are, well, how come you're not doing it? How come you feel this pressure that you got to do it? And I get it, guys. Women are the most beautiful creatures that God has ever created. I've had opportunities, for example, to see Table Mountain in South Africa, Mount Fuji in Japan, and some beautiful things around the world. There is nothing that God created that is more beautiful than a woman. Nothing. So I get it. The temptation is strong. They're so beautiful, and they're so hot, and they're so... I get it. But why should you wait? Why not be like everybody else out there? Think about it like this, my friends. We just had the Olympics this past summer. And I'm always amazed because the Olympics are a big deal in my house. Our kids love the Olympics. So when the Olympics are on, I'm looking at these athletes. These are the greatest athletes in the world. They're the top, they're the elite. They train in order to be great. Not train for mediocrity, they train for greatness. And so what happened? They had to make choices, did they not? They had to make sacrifices. So for example, when they were your age, training, they have to get up like at 5 o'clock in the morning. I remember Michael Phelps sharing his experience. He had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You don't want to get up that early. He had to train. He had to eat certain things. He had to do weights. I mean, it wasn't all in the pool. He had to do weights, he had to do running, cardio, elliptical, all this other stuff. He couldn't go to the movies all the time with his friends. He couldn't hang out with his friends like he wanted to. Couldn't go to concerts. He sacrificed that in order to be great. He ended up being one of the most decorated Olympians in history. But what does that have to do with you? Imagine if you're an athlete, you had a coach. And your coach said, you want to be great? Yes! Okay, get up whenever you want. Practice? Just when you feel like it. Just call me ahead of time. You say, no. And when you come to practice, if you're a swimmer, just swim on one lap. If you feel a little tired, that's okay. Just rest and go.